Do you think the FIA was too soft on Hamilton? Or did he simply apply sports justice in a typical case? Today we analyze in depth the official verdict that shook the sprint classification of the 2025 Brazilian GP. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. The news broke out like an unexpected thunderclap. Lewis Hamilton, after being investigated for not properly respecting a double yellow flag during sprint qualifying for the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix, would not be penalized with the usual 5 positions on the grid. Instead, the FIA opted for a formal reprimand. Nothing else. A symbolic warning. And although on paper it seems like just another technical resolution, the decision was received as a political verdict disguised as technical objectivity. To understand the caliber of the incident, we must go back to the tense final minutes of SQ2, when the drivers were fighting for a last attempt that would ensure their passage to SQ3. In this context of maximum pressure, Charles Leclerc lost control of his Ferrari SF25 at the exit of turn 10, leaving his car in a compromised position that activated the double yellow flags in that sector. This is not just a visual warning. Under FIA regulations, it means that the driver must visibly reduce speed and be prepared to stop completely if the situation demands it. Failure to do so correctly may result in an automatic penalty. Right at that critical moment, Hamilton was completing what could have been his only realistic chance to get into SQ3. His number 44 car appeared on the onboard cameras challenging that neutralized sector with no obvious signs of slowing down. There were no sudden blocks, no aggressive corrections. On the contrary, the Briton maintained a pace that visually was far from what stewards usually consider as a significant speed reduction. And this is where the controversy began. While some experts and former pilots considered that it was a clear infraction and deserved the full sanction, others began to see nuances. The FIA, in an unusually quick move, analyzed the car's telemetry data, onboard images, the exact location of the incident, and even Hamilton's testimony during the subsequent hearing. What they found was a mix between blame and justification. The visual warning lasted just a few moments before Hamilton reached that point on the track, and his focus was on the curve's line, not on the light panels. Added to this was the existence of a green light visible ahead, which could have led him to think that the danger had already been cleared. But the most delicate element is that he had seen Leclerc's Ferrari stopped in an unusual position, and that, according to the regulations, should have been enough to force a drastic speed reduction. This point is key, because although Hamilton did not see the panel at the precise moment, he was aware of the stopped car. And yet, he did not act as required by the technical regulations. So why wasn't he penalized as the rule dictates? The answer, according to the commissioners, lies in precedence. In similar situations where there were mitigating factors, either due to the visibility of the warning or specific conditions of the route, reprimands have been chosen as a form of proportional sanction. It's not the first time it's happened, but it's not common either. And that makes the feeling of favoritism, although unfair in legal terms, inevitable in emotional terms. We are talking about a 7-time world champion making his Ferrari debut on a circuit where he has shown in the past, but on a weekend that was already shaping up to be one of the most complicated of his recent career. At that moment, Formula One was divided into 2 clear positions. On the one hand, those who applauded the FIA's contextualized approach, arguing that punishment must have a direct relationship with intent and consequence. And on the other hand, those who saw in this reprimand another example of a system that at times seems to bow down to the weight of the name and the record. Ultimately, this incident opened a deeper discussion about how errors on the track are judged. Should the maximum penalty always be applied for any technical violation? Or should the FIA interpret the actions of the drivers with a more flexible criterion, taking into account the specific circumstances of each event? There is no single answer. What was clear is that Hamilton, in this case, masterfully navigated between the infraction and the justification, staying on the brink of punishment, but without falling completely. A maneuver as fine on the court as it is off it. A decision like the one the FIA made with Hamilton is not built on an impulsive act or a superficial interpretation of the regulations. It requires a meticulous, rigorous, almost surgical process. Behind the simple word reprimand hides a multi-layered technical and legal operation that, in this case, shows the extent to which the sanctioning protocol has been refined in modern Formula One, and also the extent to which this same protocol remains vulnerable to subjective interpretation. In the first instance, the analysis focused on the telemetry of car number 44, Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari. This set of data records with millimeter precision everything the driver does, brake pressure, throttle application, exact speed in each sector, steering wheel angle, even micro adjustments of the active suspension. By cross-referencing this data, with the exact moment the double yellow flags were displayed for the Leclerc incident, the stewards were able to clearly see whether or not there was a significant deceleration. The conclusion was clear but ambiguous. Hamilton briefly lifted his foot off the accelerator, a kind of technical hesitation, a barely perceptible hesitation. He did not apply the brakes. He did not reduce gears drastically. There was no locking of tires, nor signs of defensive maneuver. That reaction was interpreted as a minimal response to the context, not enough to meet the regulatory requirements of a double yellow flag, but enough not to treat it as a case of willful or reckless ignorance. But cold data is not enough. In Formula One, the technical analysis is always complemented by the oral testimony of the protagonists. At the hearing with the stewards, Hamilton stated that he did not see the illuminated warning panel. And here comes a key technical element, the exact duration of the activation of that signal. According to the visual record, the warning light was activated for just a fraction of a second before the pilot passed through that area. This is important because visibility and reaction time are factors that, in interpretation of the regulations, can alter the seriousness of the infraction. Hamilton also stated that his field of vision, at that time, was focused on the turning point of the corner, as would be expected in a thrown turn. In modern Formula One, the driver's visual concentration is millimetrically dosed. Losing half a second taking your eyes off a line can cost you a classification. It is an argument that, although it seems technical, has a strong human charge. The FIA, in its verdict, recognized this approach as credible. It wasn't an excuse. It was one more element within an extremely specific scenario. However, it was also demonstrated that Hamilton saw Leclerc's Ferrari stopped on the side of the track. This must have triggered an internal alarm. Because regardless of the light panels, the simple fact of seeing a car immobilized in a critical area forces, by common sense and regulations, to reduce speed. And this is where the FIA marked a middle point. Although Hamilton did not act with the passivity of someone who ignores the danger, he also did not do so with the forcefulness that is required in these cases. Formula One is a sport of millimeter decisions, from choosing the right tire compound to when to launch a lap in qualifying. But few decisions have the transversal impact of a sanction or, as in this case, the absence of one. And when that decision involves a figure like Lewis Hamilton, in his first season with Ferrari, the implications are triggered in multiple directions: sporting, tactical, media, and above all, psychological. That is why this decision, although technically justifiable, generates a conflict. Are we facing intelligent contextual justice, which takes all factors into account, or a selective privilege disguised as jurisprudence? Is this the FIA learning to be more flexible and humane, or simply bowing to the pressure of a name? And the problem is that in Formula One, once those types of doubts are opened, it is almost impossible to close them. Distrust sets in. The idea that there are drivers with more margin for error than others does not need to be proven to do harm. It is enough for it to be credible to those who compete. And in sport where every hundredth of a second is fought like a war, the perception of unequal treatment can become a lethal distraction. This does not necessarily mean that Hamilton was illegitimately favored, but it does mean that the FIA has some work to do in terms of communication and transparency. Because if decisions continue to have this level of public ambiguity, the credibility of the disciplinary system will continue to erode. And in a championship where equality of conditions is the basis of the show, that is something that cannot be allowed. What's at stake here isn't just the result of a sprint qualifier or even a weekend's points. It is the confidence that Formula One continues to be a sport governed by clear rules, firmly applied, and without distinction of names. Because if that trust is lost, then even technically correct decisions will no longer be believed. What happened to Lewis Hamilton in the sprint classification of the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix was not just an isolated case within the FIA regulation book. It was an event that exposed in a stark way the complexity of governing a sport where the most advanced technology coexists with the fragility of humanity. A space where the millimeter precision of telemetry must coexist with the inevitable grays of interpretation. Hamilton received a reprimand, not a penalty. That decision, at first glance small, had a much greater impact than most viewers could imagine. Saved a compromise weekend. He maintained the emotional stability of a project as loaded with expectations as his arrival at Ferrari. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.